Hello there, welcome back to the channel. Now, when considering an entity as vast as the Federation and Starfleet with as many ships and assets as it has, because you think about just Starfleet, the Federation is thousands of light years across, millions of worlds, trillions of citizens. It's a big, old organization. And you have to think and consider that when you have something so big, so vast, covering distances that are so mind-blowingly huge as space, or all that distance between the stars, accidents happen. People die. It's tragic, it's true. And throughout the long history of Starfleet and humanity's voyage into deep space, Starfleet has lost ships. And it's happened many times and for many different reasons. Sometimes it's a rogue AI that destroys it. Sometimes a great green hand reaches forth and just snatches the ship away. Sometimes some cosmic entity snaps his fingers and the next thing you know, you're at the other end of the galaxy. And we're all quite familiar with the story of the USS Voyager, dragged from the Badlands and deposited in the Delta Quadrant and kind of just left there for one reason or another along with the Maquis ship. But that's not what we're talking about. I want to talk about the USS Equinox, another Starfleet vessel, Nova-class science ship, smaller than Voyager, but no less important. And there's some questions that need to be addressed, Starfleet, about that ship. For a little bit of context, if you're not familiar with the USS Equinox, the Equinox was a Nova-class science vessel. This was actually part of the Sovereign-class line of starships. You can definitely see the influences of that design lineage with the lessons learned from all 359. So this ship comes along with things like the Akira class, the Sabre class, the Sovereign class. This new wave of much more tactically orientated and capable starships. Now, by no means is a Nova-class science vessel a powerful ship, but being a little bit more tactically minded, unlike its predecessor, the much more ubiquitous and much older space frame known as the Oberth class, the Nova class is better armed, it is faster, it is better shielded, it is more maneuverable. It takes a lot of the lessons learned and applies them to a vessel that, although is not a warship, but we realize it has to take security seriously. So the Nova class can handle itself, but it is not a warship. It's not a Defiant class, it's not an Akira class, it's not a Prometheus class. This ship is built for scientific research, planetary observation. It's basically only one step above the California class in a lot of ways. It's still, though, a pretty tough little ship. Now, this particular vessel was under the command of Captain Rudy Ransom, an officer who was known to more hide from a fight than want to engage in it. He was known for using tactics that were a bit more subversive and, escape and evade rather than engage, which for the captain of a science vessel is perfect under normal circumstances. Now, what we do know about this ship is it was scooped up by the caretaker, the same as Voyager, and then deposited in the Delta Quadrant. Now, we're not going to necessarily go over the Equinox's voyage or the ship itself from here. What we're going to discuss is Starfleet's reaction to this, and there are several questions that I have personally lingering that I feel need answering, and let me know if you agree. So let's start with the better example, which is Voyager. Aside from how the hell did Paris get from Earth to Deep Space Nine so quick that it was still worthwhile sending Voyager into the Badlands to look for the Maquis Raider, which, space is big. Looking for one Maquis ship in the Badlands, in and of itself, in my opinion, is needle, haystack, while the haystack is on fire, and the needle might not even be there anymore. So, there's that. But, of course, they were after Tuvok, one officer, which was the real interest they had here, aside from just one Maquis ship. So Voyager sent into the Badlands to look for this vessel and is quickly snapped up by the caretaker, deposited there, and the caretaker tells them the Maquis Raider is still there, by the way. Both ships seem to have only just arrived, but we know that the Maquis ship must have been there for days, because it wasn't like it disappeared into the Delta Quadrant and then within minutes Janeway's there at the New Zealand penal colony and is like, Mr. Paris, we need you. We're instantly at Deep Space Nine and we're in the Badlands. That's not that chain of events. Decisions had to be made along the line of this, where Paris had to be recruited, transported, and Janeway herself had to get to Voyager. Voyager may have already been at Deep Space Nine, fine, but we can assume that it was maybe in place to arrest and intercept the Valjean, which may have been part of the plan. But how did he anyway? That's a separate question. Space and scaling in Star Trek has always been a bit of a twitchy subject. Now the caretaker says, that sending people back is complicated. Neelix says that he's been pulling ships in and sending them back for ages. So here's my first question. Why didn't he send the Equinox back? The Equinox clearly arrived before Voyager, not after it. Unless it arrived in that brief period while Voyager and the Valjean went to the Ocampa homeworld, in which case we have to assume that Ransom's an idiot and he just left the station. Or perhaps it arrived just before Voyager, but then also left, leaving the Maquis Raider. But he was unaware of the Maquis being in the Delta Quadrant. So there's so many questions there. Why did the caretaker not send it home? He sent everything else home, the Cardassian ship and other vessels have been dragging there. Why not the Equinox? And the next question, which is one that I've always been stuck on, where exactly was the Equinox taken from in the first place? The caretaker was taking ships from all over the galaxy. That means he wasn't just bringing ships just from the Badlands, which in and of itself I have questions about. Is there something about the Badlands that makes it compatible with this technology, that it makes it easier to scoop up ships? Because the Badlands doesn't seem like the most logical place to be trying to steal ships from. Why not try and take them from in orbit of Earth? Or Cardassia? Or Romulus? Habitable worlds with a population with thousands, maybe even millions of ships buzzing around. It seems more logical, rather than anchoring the snare hidden in the Badlands. It's possible that the Badlands covered up the trap, and if you put it somewhere else, it would be more visible, but it's never really explained to me. Now, I always personally assumed that the Equinox, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments down below, was snatched up from somewhere else, maybe in a nebula or something, somewhere else within the Federation's borders, but not in the Badlands. Apocrypha does state that the Equinox was on a survey mission in the Badlands when it was taken. But this to me seems like a plot contrivance, because the only place we know about was the Badlands. And it seems like that's just what they defaulted to, rather than maybe using their imagination a bit and going, yeah, it was in the Briar Patch. And boom, taken. There's all kinds of other options, but it's never really explained why he didn't put the snare somewhere else. When was the Equinox taken? And then let's assume that it was taken from the Badlands, because that's really the only place within Federation range that we know about it being taken. Why was Janeway not informed of the disappearance of an entire starship and its crew? Why was the priority on the locating the Valjean over locating the Equinox? Now, maybe there was another ship assigned to find it, but we know that navigating the Badlands is difficult. Not many Federation ships can do it. Smaller vessels like Peregrine-class ships, Danube-class runabouts, Condor-class vessels, which for context are the Maquis Raiders, as well as some bigger ships like the Defiant and Voyager, can navigate the Badlands. And we can maybe assume that maybe Nova-class ships can as well, but not easily. It's still not exactly a friendly region. So let's stay down the train of thought that it was taken from the Badlands. Why was Voyager not told? At least told to keep an eye out for it. At least if Janeway knew that the Equinox was missing, she might have been able to assume, once arriving in the Delta Quadrant, maybe thinking, maybe that's what happened to the Equinox. Maybe Captain Ransom's out here. She could have sent out a broad subspace transmission looking for it. She could have asked other races if they'd encountered it, left buoys to try and locate it. Because he was there before Voyager. Clearly, he had to have been. Because she destroyed the Caretaker's array. The Caretaker died, and Suspiria wasn't pulling ships to the Delta Quadrant, so why was she not informed? Why were they not looking for that ship? There weren't many vessels in range that could navigate the Badlands. From what we know, at that time, the majority of Starfleet vessels patrolling that area of space, aside from the Defiant, were ships like Excelsior-class starships. These vessels cannot navigate the Badlands. They're too big, they're too slow to maneuver, and they're too much of an easy target. They're structurally not capable of taking the hits, and it's just not a good idea, which is, again, why the hell was the caretaker taking ships from there in the first place? All these pile up as questions to me. Why is it? I mean, I can assume that perhaps when Starfleet got contact with Voyager, they were like, well, the Equinox has been destroyed, fine, we don't need to go into it any further than that. But, earlier contact with Romulan, there's no one looking for the Equinox. When Starfleet did learn that Voyager was in the Delta Quadrant, thanks to the Doctor getting aboard the Prometheus, was there no question? It's like, well, another ship disappeared, or even other vessels, Cardassian ships or other ships that vanished. Maybe they were destroyed, because clearly nobody came back saying, there's this guy on this space station at the arse end of the galaxy, and he keeps taking ships there. Now he sends you back, but he performs horrific medical experiments on you, and some of us die. Some people died. They just disappeared. We lost our crew. There were 3 people just gone after the experiments, and we don't know what happened to them. And he just kind of gave us a lollipop and told us to never call again. Maybe avoid that region of space. No one is warning, not the Maquis. That's, incidentally, the Valjean is the only Maquis ship he snatched up, considering how active they were now. All the freighters that were supplying the Maquis, moving in and out, all the other transports and other vessels the Maquis were using, other than raiders. The raiders were not the only ships. They had colonial transports, freighters, and other such vessels that they were using to buzz around the colonies. Ships they'd had from before the Maquis even started. Remember, humanity, the Federation, is a big, vast entity. There's more to the Federation than the Enterprise. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way, but there is. And the civilian ships massively likely outnumber them. A bit like how you can say there are thousands of small pleasure boats, millions even on Earth, compared to maybe a few hundred naval warships. Extrapolate that to space, there are probably millions upon millions of civilian ships buzzing around out there. Those Maquis colonies would have had dozens of smaller ships that were non-combat. It's how they evacuated planets and Cisco poisoned them, things like that. So none of those ran into the caretaker. None of them. Not one. Not one. Not a single one. Ever. In the months and months he was taking ships. Okay, suspension of disbelief is severely suspended. I know you're not supposed to overanalyze it, but that's why we're here. That's why we're fans. We overanalyze, and there's a lot of things that simply don't make sense. And for me, the poor Equinox was just kind of forgotten. Voyager was all that mattered. One Maquis raider and one security officer mattered more than the entire crew of the Equinox. Now, yes, Starfleet is going to prioritize its personnel over the ships, as they should. The lives of the crew of the starships should matter more than the ship. We're not Borg, after all. So the actual vessel is an asset, but the crew are living, breathing beings with rights, and they're more important. If they die, they can't be replaced. Starfleet can build more ships, and does every day. So you can build the Equinox A if you want. Ransom could have got a new ship. His crew can't get new lives. So it's like Starfleet just forgot. They assumed it was destroyed, maybe? Let me know in the comment section down below if you think you have an actual explanation as to why Starfleet did not know what the hell happened, why they were investigating, why, more importantly, Janeway was not told of the ship's disappearance. It's much more likely, in my opinion, the simplest explanation is that the Equinox disappeared from another region of space. And as a result, as many ships disappear all the time, either Starfleet was not yet aware of the Equinox's disappearance, or they were, but because it was maybe tens or hundreds or even thousands of light years from the Badlands, there was not really any need to mention it to Janeway, because I highly doubt that the Equinox was the only ship that disappeared. What about all the ships that vanished in the Gamma Quadrant? Yeah, the Dominion destroyed them. Maybe not. Maybe one was snatched up from inside the Omarion Nebula and taken to the Delta Quadrant. We simply don't know, do we? So Starfleet's not going to tell Janeway about every ship that's disappeared. Maybe they're out there. That's just Starfleet ships. That's forgetting the hundreds of other species that are in the Federation, not to mention thousands of other species that are allied to the Federation and have their own navies and fleets, and of course they themselves are going to have disasters and accidents where ships simply vanish or disappear and are unknown. It's more likely, in my opinion, the Equinox was snatched from somewhere else, and that's why Janeway didn't know to look for it. But it doesn't explain why the caretaker didn't send the ship back. I know there's an explanation out there that someone can come up with, but that's my video on the subject. It's a little more waffly than I would have intended, but here we are. If you have made it all to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and bye-bye.